If you're looking at using cups and plates in your mosaics, well, there's a few things that you need to keep an eye out for. Otherwise, you could end up with a whole heap of cups and plates that you may not use or may not be suitable for your mosaics. So in this video, I'm going to show you what I look out for before purchasing any cups and plates. And I'm going to show you that right now. When I first started in mosaics, I used to buy pretty well any plate that had a nice pattern on it. But as time progressed, I learnt that that's not the way to do it, because you end up with a lot of plates and cups that you're not going to use. Now, if plates were given to me, that's a different thing. I would grab them, and if I thought that they weren't going to work well for me, I'd give them to an op shop or a thrift store. But as time progressed, I found that I became more discerning in what I used, and certainly in plates, I rarely buy plates these days. Most of them are given to me, which is really, really good. Because when you have a plate or a cup, when you're buying them, you need to look at, or even if they're being given to you, you need to look at the plate itself and the pattern. For instance, if we take this plate, for instance, this plate has a lovely pattern around the edge and it also has some texture. This plate would be great to use because the pattern is on the flat area of the plate. It doesn't come in to the main area, and because if it did, the foot of the plate would interfere with that pattern. Now, this plate has some crazing on it, which I really like, but this really wouldn't be suitable to use for outside. Definitely plates shouldn't be used outside anyway, because they're not suitable for it. And if you're in a freeze thaw area, the water droplets can expand 8 to 9% in a plate, and that then cracks the plate and the glaze, and before you know it, your mosaic fails over a period of time. But I do use plates outside because I'm not in a freeze thaw area. I don't get frost, so I find that they work quite well. But if I'm after longevity of 10 or 20 years, then plates for me are not the way to go either. But look, for a job outside, in my area, they're fine. But definitely if you're in a freeze thaw, don't use plates. So this has got crazing in, which means that it's going to most likely cut all right, but it's going to kind of like fall apart in certain pieces and stuff, like this plate here. This plate is one that's been made in England. It's an old plate, and it looks like it's been through a dishwasher because it's taken away that nice gloss glaze that this would have had when it was first made. But this plate is quite, I'm sorry about my fingernails, but they've got black thin set in them. So this plate is quite friable looking. It's not like, I don't even know whether you can break it. No, you can't break it, but certainly if I was to cut it, it does chip. And that's also the crazing that's adding to that. So that's a bit of a shame because it's a great place, but you could use that inside. This one's been made in England. This is a very good quality plate. It's porcelain, and this really breaks very, very well. So if I'm using this, I would use this outside. Now, it does have silver on the edge, and sometimes you'll find plates with gold as well. Some people cut those off, some people use them. For me, I would be doing a test on that silver in a small sample piece and see how it goes with the actual grout. But you could cut that off and use the rest of this, got nice texture in it. And again, the foot here does not interfere with that plate. And with that pattern on the plate. Also, you have a lovely working area for that plate. So this would be a great plate to use because it kind of like ticks all the boxes. Other plates like this. This is also a porcelain plate. This is a beautiful plate. Now, the pattern on it curves up on the sides. Also, the pattern is partially over the foot area. So if I'm using this, I have to look at this and going, well, I'm not going to use possibly all that pattern, because if I were to use all this pattern, then the chances are this foot area is going to interfere, which means that this area here is going to be slightly higher than this area. I would certainly have to break this area down into smaller pieces so it lays flat. This plate would be quite a good plate to actually use and cut. So I'm going to try that actually. And yes, I should be wearing a P2 or an N95 mask. However, I'm only going to just do this for an experiment. So I would normally use that. And yeah, see how it cuts beautifully. So if I was trimming that, that's partially over the foot area. So if I'm going to be cutting that off, I have to cut it where inside the foot area, which means that you're going to be losing, for that to stay nice and flat, you're going to be losing a little bit of the actual rose itself. But certainly this cuts really quite nicely. So if I was shaping this, and it shapes quite nicely. You know, it doesn't crumble, it shapes beautifully. So this would be actually a really good plate to use, and it's not terribly thick. It's a reasonable thickness, whereas some plates like these ones, and this was quite a large plate, you have to be aware that plates come in different thicknesses. So if I'm using this plate and this plate together, you're going to have different thicknesses. Now, I don't consider that to be a major problem depending on the piece you're going to create. However, if you're looking at buying plates, you need to keep that into consideration because you'd already be buying this type of plate, but you're going to be using, and you prefer to use this type of plate because they're just not going to work for you. So keep that in mind. If it's a decent plate and it's quite thick, then that means that your tessera, when you break it up, is going to be quite thick and you're going to have difficulty working a thin plate in with that thicker tessera. And the same with this one here. And of course your foot area here is quite thick. So if you were going to use this plate, you're going to lose probably that top area there because that's got a curve over the lip. You're going to lose that foot area there. So you're going to have this area along here, which works. And again, you would have to break these pieces up smaller so it fits flat. But it's a thicker plate. It's not as thick as this one, but it's still thick. So you need to keep that in mind. And it's the same as this one here. Now this plate here has been, or looks like someone has tried to turn it into one of those cake stand things with the little handle on top so you put all your cakes around. I've seen those quite a bit actually where people have turned old plates into those cake type stands. Not so much these days. But in this particular instance, this has quite a protruding foot area at the base here. These people here are over that foot area. So if you were looking at this plate and you're going, well, this would be great to mosaic, and it quite possibly could be, when you go home and you go to break this plate up, if you haven't taken into account this foot area, you're going to lose about, because I can feel the foot area underneath, you're going to lose about that much of the people from there down. And because this curves up, for the plate to sit flat in your mosaic, you're going to have to put a cut right across their head there so as that area sits down, unless you cut those people out, but you're still going to lose a little bit of their head area because otherwise it's going to be sticking up. So in actual fact, this plate is not as good as a lot of other plates out there. The other thing you need to take into consideration, as I mentioned earlier, is the gold leafing. This could come off. A lot of people find that it doesn't when they grout, but of course it depends on how cementitious your grout is and the sanded grout, how fine the particles they are, and how well this has been put on. So what I would be inclined to do is I would do a test sample with the grout to see if it's going to interfere with the gold. If it doesn't, then you could use the gold. However, if it does, then you would just use the people. But bear in mind, you're going to lose about that much of the people. And of course, it's going to have a cut through where their heads are. So that might work for you, it may not. But again, when you're looking at buying a plate, if you keep that in mind, then it's going to save any surprises when you go to cut this plate up and you've got, you know, this plate and think, oh, wow, these people will be great to use, but it may not be as good as what you think it is when it comes to mosaicing. So it might save you the cost if you're buying it, not to actually buy this place if you don't think it's going to work for you. Cups are the same. These cups here, this one would be a really good cup to break up. This is a porcelain cup, and you can tell by the weight and the smoothness and the quality of the cup, this cup would cut quite well, and it would be really good for me to use this outside. Again, like I said, plates and cups shouldn't be used outside. They're not made for it, but they can be really quite effective outside. So that's kind of like your risk if you choose to use it outside. In my area, like I said earlier, I can use plates and cups outside, but for longevity of say 20 or 30 years, who knows what's going to happen. But they are a lot of fun to use. Definitely inside, awesome to use. This cup here is thicker, and it's also heavier, and this cup would not break as good as this cup. So when it comes to break it with your nippers, it just wouldn't be as good as this cup here. However, you would still have to look at, if you were to use these two cups together, because of the thickness of this cup, the tesserae in this, when you cut it out, would be higher than the tesserae in this, because this is actually a thinner cup. It's not a major problem. My gazing ball I'm using things that are that thick in it, and I'm using pieces that are that thin in it. It's going to be a pain to grout, but that's not really a major problem for me because I enjoy grouting and I'll just take my time. But for other people, having a thicker piece and a thinner piece together, you might consider that to be a real pain, and it might be a nightmare for you to grout. And it may not work for your mosaic piece as well. So just keep that in mind. These ones here are off a larger cup that was like this, and to be honest, this cup broke really quite easily. This would absorb the water, and really I wouldn't be using this outside at all, even in my area. I would be using this inside. I've kept the pieces off it because it is a really nice piece to use on a mosaic inside. And I was going to actually add these to the gazing ball, but when they broke, when I could cut them so easily, I thought they're not going to be suitable at all. They're going to be too porous. Keep that in mind. The same thing applies to cups as well. Have a feel of the cup. The other thing is too, things like this, which has been a homemade a homemade ceramic piece. It hasn't been very high-fired, and this one just breaks without any pressure at all. It just breaks. So I wouldn't really be using this outside. Someone has signed their name on the bottom of it. It's not very good quality at all. Fine for inside, but for outside, you know, it's kind of like one of those things, buyer beware, because it's just porous. It'll absorb the water, and this would be one of the worst ones that you'd want to do. Look at that. So for an inside piece, you kind of use that flower, but that would be a real pain to cut that flower out unless you were cutting it out in a circle. So again, you know, when you see something like this, you think, oh, this is going to be really good, but have a look at the base and see if it's got a brand on it. If it hasn't and it's got a person's name on it, then someone has made it, and the chances are how good a quality it is, you're not going to really know except by the feel of it. And this to me feels really cheap and nasty. So keep that in mind. I tend to use branded things, but occasionally you'll find something come up like this where you go, oh, that's a nice flower. But if you're armed with the information that I've told you, then at least you can make a judgment call before you buy it. If it's been given to you, no issue at all. You know, give it a go, and you know, if you find it breaks so easy, you go, well, that's not going to be really good. Then you can either biff it, or you know, you might be able to choose a specific area for it. But even then, the glaze, I don't know how good the glaze is going to be on this either. But it sounds, you know, this was given to me, and I knew it was going to be pretty average to begin with. And even on branded items, it doesn't mean it's going to guarantee it's going to cut well. But you can tell generally by the feel of the cup how thick the cup is, and
by the brand on the base, even if it's made in the UK and it's very old, like this one, it doesn't guarantee it. But at least you can look at the craze and go, well, gee, you know, that's not going to be really good. You know, it's lost its gloss. So the chances are it's been compromised in some way where it's not going to be as good as it once was. So you go, well, the chances are this is not going to work for me. I'm not going to buy it. So not everything that has a good price to it is worth buying, because otherwise you'll end up with a whole heap of items that the chances are you're not going to use. So become a bit more discerning when you're buying your cups and your plates and your saucers. It's the better way to go, so as you don't fill up your shelving, like I've got all at the back of me here. You don't fill up your shelving with a whole heap of things that you're not going to use. So I hope that's helped you. If you have any comments, put them down in the comments section of my YouTube channel. I'll be interested in reading them, and I'm sure other people will. And I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy.